Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. This is Author in Conversation with Robert Stephens. He'll be talking about his book, Bombay Imagined. Uh, Before we start, just a few things to keep in mind. Please, I request you to turn off your phones or put them on silent, please, during the session. We'll also be taking questions towards the end, so if you could just wait for the mic to be handed to you before you ask your questions. I'd like to introduce my panelists for this session. Robert Stephens moved to Mumbai in 2007, began his career at RMA Architects, and is now part of the core team responsible for recent additions to Mumbai's built environment, including the CSMVS Visitor Center and Children's Museum at Kala Ghoda, and the under construction Mata Ramabai Ambedkar Crematorium at Worli. In 2016, he founded Urbs Indus, a studio that narrates lesser known civic histories through the juxtaposition of archival material with contemporary aerial photographs of urban India. His work has been exhibited in Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Edinburgh, and has appeared in several publications. Thank you so much for being here, Robert. Neha Sami, our moderator, studies urban and regional development and governance in post liberalization India. Her research focuses on the governance arrangements of mega projects, regional planning, and on environmental governance questions in Indian cities, particularly around issues of climate change adaptation. She teaches at IHS on questions of urban and regional governance and sustainability and research methods and ethics. Thank you so much. And over to you, Neha.
So yeah, I'm super excited about this also because I've been following Robert's work for a while, and also I'm from Bombay, so this is particularly exciting. I don't want to take away too much more time, but the format of our discussion today is because a lot of this is very visual. Robert's going to walk us through the book and his sort of imagination around the book for a bit, and then after that we'll have, sort of depending on how the time goes, we'll have a little bit of a discussion and then open it up for questions to the audience as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Neha. Thanks, Rekha, Asha, the whole IHS team. It's a great honor to be here. I'm very excited. And this afternoon, I'm going to share a little bit about Bombay Imagined. It's a book I've been working on for the last 7 years, and it's an illustrated history of the unbuilt city. Now, like many books, it begins with another book. This is a publication from 1869. It's the Professional Papers on Indian Engineering. So if anyone enjoys reading really old engineering proposals from the 19th century, this is the book for you. I discovered it because I was interested in the drainage of Bombay. It's a really beautiful article by Hector Tulloch. And I was just literally browsing this one day, like many of us do, and I came across this plan. It's a fold-out plan, really fascinating piece. Fold-out plans, of course, are very expensive to make today. In 1869, they were even more expensive. So I knew the minute I saw this plan that there was something special here, something unique. And then as I kind of meditated on this further, I noticed the color. This is, of course, hand-applied color. And it really captured my attention. Now, I was just browsing. I had no idea of making a book, of writing. I was just literally exploring the city. And this green amorphous blob in the middle of the plan changed many years to come. And it's a fascinating plan by Arthur Crawford. It was actually his idea. Hector Tulloch wrote about it. And Arthur Crawford basically had this imagination of a 400-acre park at Mahalakshmi. We'll kind of zoom in. This is the park. And, it's a really fascinating plan. This was the first landfill of Bombay, and he imagined transforming it into what he called a people's park. He said it's a people's park such as London does not possess. This was Arthur Crawford writing in 1908 about this proposal from many decades earlier. And this is an image of Crawford. Now, I love this plan because for anyone from Bombay or knows a little bit about Bombay history, we often think of Alfred Crawford for his market, Crawford Market, or his other legacy, corruption, right? But he was a Bombay resident. He thought deeply about the city. He loved the city. And this 400-acre park was one of his ideas. And I started just researching, saying, what are these other sides of Crawford that we've not seen, we've not heard about? And I came across this book, The Development of New Bombay. Now, I love this because you hear the phrase New Bombay and automatically think Charles Correa, Sharish Patel, and Pravina Mehta. They're planned from 1964. But kind of rewind, 1860s, 1870s, Arthur Crawford's imagining a new Bombay already, and he writes about it. He publishes this book in 1908. And, I started searching, found I couldn't find it in Bombay. World Catalog found a copy, and it was at the University of Minnesota. So I was very excited. I wrote to them. I'm based in Bombay. I wrote to them and said, I think you have this publication. Can you help? They said, of course. 2 days later, they wrote back and said, I'm sorry, we can't find it on our shelves. And I was heartbroken. So I was really, really looking forward. Kept searching, found out there was a copy in the Asiatic Society Library in Bombay. I became a member. That's much harder than it sounds. It involves a lot of paperwork, but I prevailed, and member number 5266, and finally got in and found the book. It's a really beautiful, about so big A5 size, and of course it's not to be issued out of the library. So I made a Xerox. They allowed me to make a Xerox. I kind of took a photograph of what the book looked like, and then in Photoshop recreated the cover. So this is my personal copy, even though it's not to be issued out. And it has a really beautiful inscription at the front. It was a gift by Jahangir Screwwala. So anyone who has, a valuable library, do consider gifting, at the right time. So this book had many other of Crawford's ideas. This is from 1870. The image we see is Mumbai Devi Temple tank. And this is what Crawford imagined for the tank. He said it could be a place more beautiful and picturesque than the Place Vendôme in Paris. He imagined ghat-like steps in black and white marble were to lead down to the water's edge, while gardens with seats were to bifurcate the descent. Now, what I love about this imagination, Crawford's beautification plan, he understands that tanks are essential to people's lives in Bombay. Tanks are not just reservoirs of water, they're centers of cultural life, of spiritual life, and this was his vision for kind of contributing and developing that aspect of Bombay's built environment. Of course, this didn't happen. The tank was filled in a couple of decades later. Now, Crawford's plans, they basically kind of started this search, this imagination. What else was there for Bombay that was ideated, dreamed, envisioned, that was not realized? And did a lot of research, compiled, hundreds, thousands of pieces of paper from libraries in Bombay, all around the world, and kind of felt very established. Yes, I have an idea. I'm going to write a book. It's going to have 100 unbuilt plans. These are some of the institutions from around the world that contributed content. And things were going smoothly. This was the manuscript. It sat very comfily in my wardrobe. And then this happened. My wife, Tina Nandi, and I were expecting our first child. This was in 2016. And it changed the whole course of course, our lives, but also the book. We decided very early on that we wanted two things. We wanted a home birth, and we wanted a water birth. Now, of course, for water birth, you need water. So Tina went into labor on May 18th, around 9 in the morning. By around 2 p.m., she was progressing well enough that we said, now it's time to fill the kiddie pool in the house. We had a midwife, of course, a doula, and a backup doctor for anyone who's a little worried. And around 2:30, we get a knock on the door. I said, who could be bothering us now? We're in the middle of having a child. I open the door. It's one of our security guards, and he says, "Saab, 5 baje sham se 7 baje subah pani bilkul nahi milega. Kuch bhi nahi milega." Oh, exactly, yeah. I panicked. I said, "What?" He said, "Water cut." So I freaked. I completely freaked. So we had an hour, hour or two to kind of do what we could. And we managed, fortunately. And sure enough, at 5 o'clock sharp, the water was cut. There was no water. We managed to fill the pool and also fill drinking water because it was a long night. Tina went when Tina's labor continued, and just before midnight, our son was born. He's here in Bangalore with us this weekend. He's at an arcade because he calls this the dumb Bombay book. So we didn't want to bore him. So, Bombay Imagined, it began as a very serious, a very scholarly work. Then the water birth happened, and it became all of a sudden life, and kind of all these other ideas became very playful and artistic. And it really transformed how I think about the work that you'll see a bit of now. Speaking of water, now I thought let's dive into some of the projects. 1845, a Bombay-based engineer, LCC Rivet, has this to say: amongst the first requisites of a large and growing city is a plentiful supply of fresh and wholesome water. Now, I felt this. In 2016, you have to have water. The minute water is not there, everything goes for a toss. LCC Rivet knew that, and that kind of set the stage for Bombay's development. Amongst the first plans to improve Bombay's water was this idea from 1852. It was proposed by Henry Conybeare. He was actually a hydrologist, an amateur architect, and he had a really sensitive idea. He said there are hundreds of tanks in the island of Bombay, natural tanks. He said, let's create filtering wells in each tank that purify the water because it was kind of grossly polluted. Let's create these filtering wells, and then people can draw water from the filtering wells, and this will kind of give them a new lease on life, all of these decentralized tanks. Now, of course, that doesn't work, right? Crawford knew that tanks are not just reservoirs of water. They give life in other forms. And Conybeare missed that. He would have not allowed people to access the water themselves. They would have had to draw from buckets, and this never happened. Later the same year, so that idea gets shot down, then he dreams bigger. He has this much more radical imagination. He says, if in the island city we can't put these filtering wells in the tanks, let's go to the north of the city, the Salsette Hills, and let's create a series of large reservoirs. Okay, this is home to present-day Vihar, Powai Lakes, Tulsi Lake. But Conybeare's first idea was this series of interconnected reservoirs. There were 5 of them. And as the city grew, he said, then each one can be added and interconnected. So it was this very kind of expandable master plan, what happened was much more piecemeal. He imagined at 1852, he wrote every resident should have 20 gallons of water per day. Now that's, people gasp at that. That's unheard of. Present day Bombay, half the population gets about 10 gallons a day. The elite have about 40. So Conybeare was really, really kind of laser focused and ahead of his time of what the needs of the city would be. But again, it was too large, too expensive, didn't happen. Now you see at the top, Kaneri Caves. Many of you may know the Buddhist temple, Buddhist cave complex in Salsette Hills. We zoom in there. By 1868, there's already one reservoir, the Vihar Reservoir, and there's fear in the city that if something happens to this tank, we'll be left with no water. So kind of these other large schemes begin to be developed, and this is one by Russell Aitken. It was a 500-acre tank, and the kind of radical idea here was the dam, the retaining wall, was to be 136 feet high, and this would have been the tallest reservoir in the world at the time. Of course, didn't happen. It was just considered too risky. And one of the fascinating things when you look at Bombay's built history, you see ideas rarely go away. They just they slumber and they come back in different forms. So this is 1868. 1961, you see the exact same lake being proposed again. Now it's under the name Dahisar Lake. The Kaneri Caves are still, in the vicinity. And this was fascinating. It had grown from 500 acres in Aitken's time to 730 acres. Now 200,000 trees would have been submerged. It didn't happen because the government was going to charge themselves to buy the land, and they hiked the land prices so high they couldn't afford their own budget. So it's like a really complicated thing, but it fell apart for that reason. So of course, this is, Dahisar Lake would have been in the heart of the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. And using that, we're going to kind of segue to some park projects. Again, 1865, coming back to Crawford's plan, he proposed this huge park, and it was on the city's landfill. In fact, he argued it's because the ground is so filthy, it has so much waste, that it's really well suited to become a rich natural habitat with plantation. The same area, about 20 years later, another Bombay resident, this time he's a medical practitioner, Dr. Henry Cook, says, let's take Mahalakshmi, this low-lying kind of waste area, let's develop it into a lake. And this was to be a reservoir that held water in the monsoon, because Bombay is kind of like a bathtub, and this was the bottom of the bathtub. Let's develop this into a really beautiful lake that captures water in the monsoon, and then slowly lets it dissipate into the ground after the monsoon. Now, he was also a little bit of a selfish fellow. He was a painter. So this is how we imagine he might have looked standing, on that landscape, painting this kind of beautiful, almost English countryside. In the background is Haji Ali for reference, anyone who will understand. 1912. 1912 is a really interesting year. New Delhi, the master plan for New Delhi is happening. There's a parallel plan in Bombay happening called New Bombay. And it has many of the same graphic features of the Delhi plan. These kind of long vistas, central vista, 3 kilometers long, a government house at the end. But one of the aspects of this master plan that I think often gets overlooked are the parks. For reference, this bottom right red circle is Churchgate. This is Oval Maidan. Oval, of course, is one of the largest green spaces in South Bombay today. And to the west of Oval was a complete open public space. It was just, it's crazy. Anyone who knows Bombay, Brabourne Stadium is there, Wankhede Stadium is there. A huge number of Art Deco private, very elite homes are there. But this was originally imagined as an open space, landscape space for the city's residents. What happened in 1912, of course, World War I broke out shortly. New Delhi proceeded. New Bombay was completely cut. And one resident in the city at the time argued that Bombay was getting stepmotherly treatment. So the very emotional response. By 1920, the City Improvement Trust begins making plans all throughout the island city. And this is a really fascinating plan. I'd never heard of it before. It's called the Dharavi Development Scheme. Now, in 1920, there were about 1,000 people residing in Dharavi, from what I've read. It's very underpopulated. And so the City Improvement Trust comes out with this imagination for a 553-acre development. The very center is a 13-acre central park. And there would be thousands and thousands of residences, high class, middle class, and working class. And everything was proceeding smoothly. And then they said, now let's wait. Let's finish these housing schemes at Worli and at Mahim, the BDD Chawls, of course, at Worli. And we'll come back to the Dharavi scheme after that. Those projects dragged. By the time they came back to Dharavi, there were 5,000 residents. And of course, evicting 5,000 residents was out of question, so the entire plan floundered. 1921, same kind of very intense time period of development, coming back to South Bombay, back to Nariman Point. William Davidge prepares this very grand plan for the Back Bay reclamation. Now, I love this map. For anyone who is interested in Patrick Geddes or has kind of explored him, I consider him a mentor. This was part of his personal archive from when he was in Bombay. He went back, after his time in Bombay, he went back to Scotland, carried this drawing with him. And it's, as far as I know, the lone surviving color copy of the Back Bay Master Plan. And it has, it has many, many layers to it, but kind of the most striking is this central mall. Right, it's strung through the heart of the Back Bay development. It includes an underground metro line, underground stations you see in the center. Very dramatic plan. Of course, this just kind of ended in complete chaos and disaster. It was completely uneconomical, the entire proposal, and left incomplete halfway. One resident described incomplete Back Bay at the time as like nothing on this earth. And if you see Back Bay today, you'll see this seawall in the middle of the ocean. It's like, it's really surreal. Same year, 1921, is one of my favorite contributors in the book. It's just a completely radical vision for Bombay. There are aerial taxis. The entire Back Bay is reclaimed and made into a park, a forest. There are skyscrapers in Back Bay that have landing pads for these taxis. The author of the scheme says there was order and chaos everywhere. And you just think like, what is this? And then he says, then I woke up. It was a dream. It was literally a dream. This gentleman had been lying on the grass at Malabar Point. He fell asleep. He says he actually rolled down the hill and then hit a fence. Then he woke up. He realized, it was all in his imagination. Then after he wakes up, he says this: sadly, I wandered back home to my comfortless room in my comfortless hotel, past the series of dumps on the sea face, which represented man's puny efforts to make Bombay the paradise I had pictured. Right? So he's referencing the Back Bay work, right, which was left incomplete. Poor fellow, but great imagination. And this we'll come back to this a little bit later. These are speculations, right? He wrote about it. He wrote very vividly, but there was no visual content. So we created some visual content in the book to give a graphic voice. 1948. This is the first master plan for Bombay, the first formal master plan. And Albert Mayer, a New York-based town planner, partnered with the Bombay city engineer N.V. Modak. And their plan was onefold. It was to recreate a great city. That was their kind of tagline. We're going to recreate a great city. And part of that included parks. A very large part of that included parks. They described parks as a civic necessity, must be done. And the very center of Bombay's most crowded bazaar district, they said there must be a 200-acre park, much like Central Park. And how they imagined that, it was quite simple. They said, let's demolish all of the old buildings in this part of town, and then we will rebuild new dwellings on the Willingdon Sports Club grounds and the race course. So we will usurp the rich and famous lands for the city's residents, and then give their former land back as a public park. Of course, basically nobody was happy with that, and it didn't happen. But I think it's a great imagination. If you just look at the master plan, bang in the center, they had this vision, not far from where Crawford imagined his first 400-acre park at Mahalakshmi. 1949, yet another really crazy idea. One of my favorite places in Bombay, Banganga Tank. If anyone's been there, it's just when you descend the tanks to the tank, it's special. You feel like you're going back hundreds of years into this other landscape, other era. 1949, the government of Bombay says, let's fill the tank. Can you believe that? They said, let's fill it. There were a couple of drownings a couple years before. And he said, let's just fill the tank, make it a children's park. Of course, the temple trust that was managing the tank was up in arms. And the bizarre thing about this is, it's a new government, right? It's self-government. And they then tried to use British era legislation to acquire the tank. It's just really bizarre. Like, what's the point if, And fortunately, it would have cost 5 lakhs, and the budgetary approval never came. But this was their vision for safeguarding Bombay's residents, I guess. Fortunately, it didn't happen. It's a beautiful space. Do visit if you're in Bombay. Now, many of the visuals in the book are scanned over here. You can't see it. It's a nice space. At ReproScan. So I would often, travel from Bandra to ReproScan, and in order to get there, I'd have to cross this street. It's a really painful. This is Tulsi Pipe Road. It's a really painful, scary crossing. My wife says I'm not allowed to talk on the phone when I'm crossing streets like this because she definitely wants me to get home. So, I took this image, and then a little bit later, I came across Ajit Bhattacharyaji's plan from 1973 for car-free Bombay. And I absolutely love it. He said there should be no private cars in the island city, not one. Everyone should have to travel by public transport. And his imagination was once you get all these cars off the road, you can then transform Bombay's streets into parks and gardens. And this is the same street, how I think he would have imagined it. I like to think he would have called it Tulsi Pai Parkway, as a kind of play on words, of course. Yeah. Anyways, we'll speculate on that maybe. So we've just looked at, about a dozen recreation projects. Before that, the water supply fall under what I consider the sanitation typology. The book itself has 16 typologies, and many projects, of course, aren't just one thing, right? They have many layers. They're like people. We're all complex. So many projects fall under different typologies. We made subtypologies, which are 41, and the book is designed in such a way that, say, like me, you love sanitation, you love drainage. Like, great, you can read just about Bombay's unbuilt drainage history. Right? How enthralling is that? So there are 41 books basically in Bombay Imagined. They cover 200 unrealized plans. And, it's really thanks to the pandemic that this book happened. I wrote for 200 days straight. I absolutely loved every minute of it. And for anyone, Amitava Kumar is kind of my mentor in writing. He recently published this book, Writing Badly is Easy, and it's fantastic. Anyone who's interested in writing, I strongly recommend it. I have a whole other talk almost on his book, but no jargon, basically. Let's just get to the point. These are some of the first drafts. I love writing by hand. When I first saw the book title, Writing Badly is Easy, I was kind of worried he was talking about handwriting. So I saw my notes and I thought, like, obviously, writing badly is easy. We've had a great team that's worked on Bombay Imagined with me. I begin with Bonnie. She's our in-house cat, and she literally went over every word in the book. There's about 62,000 words, and she went over each one. So we're really grateful to her. Deshna Mehta and Carol Nair designed the layouts, and they created what I call the architecture of Bombay Imagined. And I'll just kind of walk you through one spread, and like this, there are, of course, 200. So, of course, there's the title, the year the project was imagined. The entire book is chronological, so it's quite straightforward in that sense. The creator, and of course, they're architects, they're engineers, but they're also lay people. They're students. It's a wide mix of residents of the city who have thought and imagined in creative ways. Each project has this kind of tick on what we call a relief map that shows where you are in Bombay. So if you flip through the book like a flip book, you can see how over time people have focused attention in the south, in the north. It's a kind of a very fun thing. And the city's form has changed dramatically also over the last 350 years. So you see that transformation with the flip book, kind of a very kinetic object. Now on the left, these little tabs are the typologies, right? So I'm a very visual learner, so I love seeing, when I hold the book edge, you can see how projects have focused on different typologies in different periods of time. The very earliest ideas for the city have nothing to do with parks, because there's green space everywhere. The city's open, right? And then we create a big mess and we say, well, now we should jam some parks back into the city. So you see all these kind of bizarre developments. The bottom, what you see here, these are we call this the matrix. So it helps you, like me, you love that sewage drainage idea. You read just those page numbers, jump from one to the other. Each project has about 150 to 200 word text. It's very brief. And this is one of Amitava's tips. I love extreme brevity. So the task was, how could I write each project in the fewest words possible? And if a word wasn't necessary, it was gone. There are footnotes. I love brevity and I love truthfulness. So each project has any reference, anything that could be disputable is referenced with a footnote, so you can go back and see the source and trust that I'm not making things up. Then there's a pull quote. which is meant just to draw people in, sometimes a little bit mundane, sometimes very crazy, and then of course a graphic. This is a speculation as well. And that brings us to the speculations of Bombay Imagined. Now, I love the speculations. You know, I was working with Fawaz, who will come too. We kept finding all these really radical projects that I could see, I could see so vividly, but there was just no drawing. And I thought, wow, it's really unfortunate we can't have this project in the book. And then we said, let's just create our own visuals. So we did that. This was a sketch for a multi-story parking garage on Ornament Circle Gardens. Right, just really mean, I think, as a proposal. Opposite, of course, is the Asiatic Society. And I gave this sketch to Aniket, who you see here, and he created this really beautiful piece of art. And that's it. And it's just, I love it. They're like paintings. And they're all founded on historical data, scale. It's so much fun. I really love these. We created 30. In the book, Aniket was one of the artists. There was another artist, Akil, based in Calicut, and then Yanis and Lambros, based in Athens and Berlin. And through the pandemic, we just worked together and created, and it was really a lot of fun. This was another of Aniket's pieces. This was George Whittett's Gateway of India Avenue. So Gateway of India, of course, many of you will know, it's kind of just sitting like a big block, at the end of Colaba. It was part of a grander plan. There was to be this very monumental processional avenue opposite. And of course, it never happened. The yacht club chambers weren't demolished. Regal Theater came up, and the gateway was just left floating. So this was another of Aniket's really beautiful pieces. And then Fawaz, I like to think books are like cities, or at least this book I consider like a big city. In order to really work well, a lot of people come together and contribute and perform at an exceptional level. And Fawaz kind of started that for me. He was the project manager. I first contacted him and said, let's work together for 4 months, and I just need you to make some diagrams, some little maps. And we ended up working together for the last 25 months. And he managed so much. He created speculations as well. He did overlays. This is an aerial photograph I took about 5 years ago of Bombay, and Fawaz created an overlay of the Worli-Nariman Point Sea Link. So again, just really beautiful collaboration, and this was Fawaz's work on this aerial image. And then, of course, production, right? The book is a physical object, and as much as I thought books are made by machines, I realized they're not. They're made by people who are exceptional craftsfolk. And I'll just introduce some of the team. This is Praveen Totre. He manages everyone. He brought everyone in this image together, and he drove the printing process. He's phenomenal. This is Lena. She actually designed how the book is produced. And I didn't even know you had to do that. So she was kind of like the production manager, I considered her. Rimshi and Shitij worked on those relief maps, which you saw on the top left of each page. Shitij made each map. Rimshi did all the research to make sure the form of the city was matching with the time period. And then Shah Alam Sheikh, he led the binding team. And I think the binding is the most artful part of book production. Because you can only do so much by machine. Then after that, everything was by hand. So you see a few copies outside. I consider each book genuinely handcrafted. And it's by everyone in this team. They're really superb. I consider it one of the highlights of my life, having the chance to work with them, this team specifically. So do enjoy the book, and when you see it, look at the corners, look at every inch, because they have crafted it. And we self-published. Why it's complicated, I don't exactly know, but we did. Bonnie was with us, of course, the whole way and always on top of things. My wife, Tina, who of course you know, she supported when we said, we need to basically use all our savings to produce this book. She said, okay. So she's fantastic. And then everything after the book was made, Tina did. So if you see the Instagram, if you order a book, the website, she's designed the shipping, logistics, just everything. So really grateful to Tina. And then our son Kairav, even though he considers it the dumb Bombay book, he's still very supportive. So we're really thankful. And he allows the books to a large extent to sit in our living room and take up some of his play space. So we're really grateful to him. So with that, thank you very much. And I think we'll have some discussion time now. Oh, okay, sure. Is that okay, the backdrop?
So thanks so much, Robert. That was fascinating, and I think just so that folks get enough of a chance to kind of ask you questions as well, I'll keep my questions brief, although I do have a lot. I think what I'd like you to reflect on a little bit, there were quite a lot of things that struck me as you were going through your talk, particularly around sort of the question of water and drainage, and the importance of tanks. And for those who are in Bangalore, you know it resonates a lot. Being in a water scarce city, this entire idea of having tanks, I could see a lot of older Bangalore plans reflected in this very much. But sort of stepping back from that as well, I just wanted you to think and reflect both historically as well as in terms of sort of contemporary and future plans for cities, the roles of sort of urban imaginations, the thing that you were thinking about, sort of plans as imaginations, and sort of, a lot of them even now continue to fail. They don't, we don't have plans that get ratified. We don't have plans that meet their full potential in various ways. But to you, from the work that you've done, what role do failed plans play sort of in the imagination of a city, of the city's sort of growth, even though they may never get implemented?
Am I still on? Yeah. Yeah. So, as I was working on the book, Tina would often look over my shoulder and she'd say, "It's so depressing. Like, how can you do this? It's like punishment." And I said, yeah, I understand, but I found it very hopeful, actually, because I think, I don't know, I find a power in ideas that it gives life, in my opinion, and it gives hope. And I also find it fascinating. You see some of the same ideas keep coming back time and again. And I think that shows the underlying inspirations keep coming back. And it's just the people, the context changes. But in general, I just think, I think the unrealized ideas, I find them very hopeful. And I think we need a lot of hope in our cities. So I cling on to that.
That's actually a really sort of nice way of thinking about it. And sort of one other question, particularly on sort of for Bombay going forward, for example, through your work, both through, Obzindis as well as the work that you're doing with RMA, etc., do you see any kind of potential to bring some of this hope back, like with the work that you're doing with the city? I mean, so sort of, taking that back into the other work that you do?
That's a really hard question. No, I think what I've learned, like Asha mentioned the crematorium project we're doing. It's a once in a lifetime project, and it's happening because two individuals who are not government employees. They're just two elderly gentlemen who said Bombay needs, must have. They use the word world class, crematorium. I would say it just needs basic and good, facilities. And they've made it happen as individuals. So I think what's given me kind of the takeaway from that is the role non-architects, non-urban planners, the role citizens who recognize a need play. The architects and planners are just one side, right? And we're actually very small. We think we're very powerful, but I think we're actually not. It's the common citizens who I see as having this kind of ability to be a catalyst, and hopefully, what they've done will spur on more. Um, yeah. It's-
Great. Maybe we can take one round of questions from folks, if there are any.
Hi. Really enjoyed the talk, and the book looks very inviting. So I'm looking forward to going through it. Right now, if you see, I think the imagination of the politician and the imagination of their whoever are their partners, real estate people, and so on. Those are the imaginations being played out in our cities. And not just that, it's also very strange because they might even plan something, but even that takes 5-6 years, and many other people, and then so many things sort of come in between. Where is the possibility of, imaginations of the people to come into this? Because I'm part of a community group, and we are trying to do this, and it's extremely difficult.
Extremely difficult. And I think the hardest part is, and I don't mean this in a mean way, it's just what I've observed, the politicians and those in power are not, at least the Bombay context, they're not interested in receiving ideas. They just don't care. Because that would be a critique on yourself, that I'm not capable of having the best ideas or the right solutions. And I like to think, as an architect, projects are as good as their clients, right? You can't do really meaningful work if your client, or I wouldn't say can't, it's extremely rare. Do really meaningful work when you and the client are not more or less on the same page. And the politicians that govern so many of these decisions, they're just not on the same page. So with that missing, I often feel it's like it's such loggerheads. And where to go from there, I have no answer, unfortunately. And it's sad because I think in certain levels of the political mix, there are people who are genuinely interested in doing good work, or who are interested in receiving, but they're limited, right, in how much they can do. So it's a difficult question that I don't have the answer to, but I still, coming back to that first question, I think it's really important to keep having the ideas, even if they don't happen now. Like, our lifetimes are short, right? And those ideas can survive. Arthur Crawford's idea for that 400-acre park, it's exactly the same as Aditya Thakere's plan for the Mumbai park in 2016. It's the exact same footprint. And he says, Aditya Thakere says we should not have this as elitist. Every community should be able to come in and use this park. And that's word for word what Arthur Crawford imagined. Now, of course, there are other reasons he was saying that. There are reasons it's not happening that are complex and unfortunate. But ideas survive. So I think creating them, producing them, getting them out, especially in a tangible physical form, I find book and print to be really powerful. If I say something on Instagram that's controversial or wrong, nobody cares. If I put it in a book and print it, people, it's serious, right? The printed word is really serious. So my advice for myself, and what I would advise, is just keep producing work and ideas, and maybe you'll find that click with the client who shares those values, maybe not.
A quick follow-up on that would be that because anything visual is so powerful, so the idea behind that is just explained visually. Yeah. Maybe it makes sense for for us to try and get as many visual.
Totally, it's making ideas accessible, and we're also in a culture that we don't value reading, especially long text, right? It's not a cultural value right now. So I think anything with long text gets lost. Anything with visuals, right, it captures, and it's power. It's really, really, engaging. So I'm a huge fan, as you've seen, of visuals. So definitely, I think that's a key aspect to the way forward. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, in addition to these formal plans, that you showed us today, if you came across any informalities in your archival work, and also what role do you think informal ways of living, accessing water, electricity play in kind of imagining the future of our cities?
Yeah. Gosh. So I mean, of course, the dreamer, the anonymous dreamer, that was very informal. No, he fell asleep, banged his head, and had this great idea. So that was there. There were many. It's the informal ideas were typically by like city residents. So there was this gentleman, H.K. Wakil, who said, Chowpatty Beach is it's too crowded. Let's segregate a zone for hawkers and a zone for just people recreating, and let's make these two kind of stacked zones on Chowpatty. So that was, that was just one example. So there are many, but they lack the visual. Typically, the informal ideas always lack the visual, but they were often also, I think, the most powerful coming back. And that's why it was so important to create images for every idea. Yeah, was that the question? Sorry. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah. There not. I can't think of any projects in the book that deal specifically with that question. Although I'm sure many people have thought on it, especially working in the informal settlements. It's another direction for research now.
So the thing I want to add there is actually it's not just sort of informality as we think of in terms of, sort of informal settlements. There's also elite informality. And so, a lot of what you were talking about right now about sort of citizens participating, but not necessarily through government channels, in some way that's also sort of, informal participation. It's just also, we don't see it, as being informal. It's just the criminalized and the kind of so-called illegal, and sort of blurring of boundaries between sort of where the informal becomes illegal and how informal then becomes, in some ways, civic duty, participation. And I think it's actually really interesting to think about sort of ways in which we all use our social networks and we all use ways of accessing and navigating the city in multiple different ways. And I think just something that I see again and again through the work that I do is actually just this kind of blurring of boundaries between where sort of informality become, that gray area where it goes from, how people access services, governance, all of that, and where that suddenly becomes kind of vote bank politics and where it sort of goes the other way. More questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the. It was quite interesting and a lot of food for thought as well. My question is about something to do with the pandemic. I come from a field of mental health, and the pandemic was really a watershed moment for my field, because of which there have been a lot of changes. Through your research, have you found any watershed moment of sorts for city planning and architecture that may have led to significant change in how you visualize the city's plan?
All I could think of when you started that question was the mental health aspect in the pandemic. And sorry, it's not your question, but I loved the pandemic because I was able to get time.
Similarly, so I think a lot of us had a very productive period.
Yeah, it was, and it was very hard for many people, but I felt I thrived. But because of that thought, I didn't follow your question. So could you repeat, please?
Just as the pandemic was a watershed moment for many fields across disciplines, do you find a similar kind of a period where the city planning or architecture found its significant turn?
Offhand, no. And that's, partly because Bombay Imagined is that, it's imaginations. It's not necessarily formal planning. It's actually a majority of the book is if I were then just to think on these discussions, majority is informal. It's people having ideas and just kind of flying a kite. So I don't think I would be qualified to say if there was a watershed moment. What I would be qualified to say is Bombay has this kind of mysterious pool of generating creative ideas and inspiring people. Maybe it's because we have so many problems. Creative people have said these are possible solutions, right? And that's been consistent. And that's what I love. Like, as someone interested in history, I love saying, like, you know, in the 1700s, what were people thinking to solve the city's problems? And it just, you know, it never stops, that thinking and the creative solutions.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
That was so fascinating. You know, I have a childhood association with Mumbai. Grandparents used to live there. I've spent several summers there. My husband is from Bombay, so continue visiting it. But you're so right, you know, when you also said the visual element is so important. And since we are coming off the back of, you know, popular literature seeping into economics, I recently concluded watching Modern Love Mumbai. If, you know, if I see it's popular. And a couple of episodes that really stayed with me. One is, you know, the Mumbai Dragon. I never knew there was a Chinese temple in Masgaon. So, you know, this power of popular literature, anything to do with recording that either recreates imagination or brings to the forefront what we really didn't know existed. And, you know, the other episode, of course, the centrality is the love story, but making this commute from Bombay to Thane and, you know, that government project and how it plays out. Of course, there's a sweet love story that results from it. But when you were talking about government entities being at odds with the imagination, I was imagining that scene, you know, where one character tells the other character, oh, this project has been shelved, and she's put her heart and soul into it. So several things coming into the narrative, which is it's so important to document in different forms. And also, you know, how imagination keeps getting stymied, but it goes on. Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
sharing that. Just one response, I think we have to wrap up maybe. My wife recently bought a book on Bangalore. It's perplexed. I said, why'd you buy this book? I love her response. It floored me. She said, I want to fall in love with Bangalore. And she got a book to do that. We live in Bombay, of course. And I was stunned. Like, I love that rang, you know, books have the power to help us fall in love with places. Because it's like a conversation with a place and people and ideas we've never met, never will meet. And so, yeah, very powerful popular culture visuals, and especially books.
So yeah, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you all for being here, for participating. Thank you for coming and sharing your book with us. And the books outside, along with a lot of other material from City Scripts, please do step around, take a look at everything that's there. And Robert's around if you want to ask him anything.
Yes,
Thank you.